Okay, so I'm Harriet and I host With You in Mind, and this is part of a series called Facing Challenges, where I chat to people kind enough to talk to me about living with adversity. And really, the series is to inspire hope and insight into what that's like and to offer strategies for people that might be needing the same. So today, I'm delighted to introduce Amelia Hall. I think most of you know her who are on live at the moment. So I will hand over and let Amelia introduce herself. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So like Harriet said, I'm Amelia Hall. I'm in my 30s. I have a physical disability known as cerebral palsy. I also have some mental health diagnoses as well, but the primary thing I talk about on my Substack is, living with my physical disability, which does also involve chronic pain as well.
Mhm. Okay, well, so it sounds, you've got a lot of things on your plate, Amelia,
hmm
um, both physical and, mental health issues too.
hmm
So it would be interesting for us to sort of understand a bit more about what it is like for you day to day, sort of juggling all
hmm
those conditions and
hmm
what's involved with that.
So I do I do have a job that I work 9 to 5, during the week. That job is remote.
Hmm.
So I work as an accessibility specialist for a bank. So I have my disability, but then, I decided to pursue schooling related to psychology, and then I got a master's in social work, primarily
Hmm.
because I wanted to, also help other people with disabilities and, be an advocate to people who may not have a voice otherwise, and just sort of, be the person that I wish I would have had as a child.
Mm. That sounds difficult, Amelia, when you put it like that. The
hmm
person that you wish you'd had as a child.
hmm
So, so maybe you can tell us a bit about that. What was it like growing up, and did you from the get-go, did you have a lot of these conditions, or did it evolve and change as you got older?
So, CP has always been there. I'm pretty sure I got diagnosed when I was 2 years old, but that's been there from the get-go. In terms of anxiety, that didn't develop until I was probably 15, 16, and a lot of that developed because I was in physical therapy from the time I was 2 until I was 16. And I also had a lot of operations when I was a child, which caused a lot of, medical trauma. And I also have a recent ADHD diagnosis as well. One of the other issues too is related to my CP. I also deal with chronic pain.
Mm,
Um, so, yeah.
yeah. So you started off with CP, and that
hmm
obviously caused a lot of in and out of hospital.
hmm
Um, and were you aware of what was going on? I mean, I'm guessing at that sort of age, it's your normal.
So I didn't have my first operation. I didn't have my first operation till I was 11 years old.
Mm,
And what that meant was I was at an age where I knew everything that was happening.
okay.
I understood everything. I felt everything. I probably didn't understand it to the point that, myself at 33 would understand, but I understood enough to know what was going on,
Mm,
which was a big contributor to my anxiety and also,
mhm,
medical trauma and things like that.
mm. So when you say you knew what was going on, you knew that you had this condition that needed lots of operations,
Mm-hmm.
and that it
Oh yeah.
most people weren't like, well, a lot of other people weren't in that sort of
Mm-hmm.
similar place. So
Yes.
hence the anxiety was about probably that as well as what you had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
anxiety about the operations and the fact that you were different
Mm-hmm.
in some
Mm-hmm.
way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I, in terms of school and things like that, I went through regular education, and I was mainstreamed through school and things like that, which I think ultimately was good for me. But when I was in school, I did experience quite a bit of bullying, which was unfortunate. But I've used writing a lot to work through that, which has been helpful.
Mm-hmm. And were you using writing back then at school as well when it was going on?
Yeah, yes. So I started writing poetry and short stories probably 9 or 10-ish. And so I can't remember where they are at this point, but I used to get, those, yellow legal pads that you can just pick up from an office store.
Okay.
So I used those to write
Mm-hmm.
all my stories, and I just had tons of them just kind of stacked around. And I did that a lot as a child, for sure.
Oh wow! And what were they sort of using your imagination type stories, or were they documenting what was going on?
They were me revisiting what I had already experienced. And I
Mm,
actually I haven't read those in, goodness gracious, probably 15 years at this point.
mm,
So
mhm,
I do wonder if I look back on them now, whether they
mm,
still feel accurate to me
mm,
or not. But anyway.
mhm. But at the time, it was quite cathartic for you. It could sort of
Mhm.
release,
Mhm.
or at least help you process what was going on, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something you still use today. Obviously, you're here on
Mhm.
Substack,
Mhm. Yep.
and maybe you can tell us a bit whilst we're talking about writing,
For
a
sure.
bit more about what you're doing on Substack.
Yeah, so I joined Substack in January of this year. I had joined a little bit before, but I didn't start posting regularly until January. And I have been focused on, talking about my life with a disability, but then also talking about, parenting, talking about the importance of accessibility. I do, because of my master's in social work, I do also have a background in mental health as well. So it's kind of
Mhm,
a amalgamation of, disability, motherhood, mental health, accessibility related things. But my main focus is I want to bring awareness and light to, the disability population and how
mhm,
important we are for society, and
mm.
how we shouldn't be sidelined or forgotten, and that we have, important perspectives to share for sure.
Absolutely. And I know we talked a bit about this offline, but and also you talked about in your blog about a situation when you were going into the hospital or a clinic and you were parked, someone parked you in.
Hmm.
And of course
Yes.
that was a big deal and people just
Yes.
don't seem to consider that. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about how this crops up in day-to-day life, maybe.
So probably my biggest pet peeve. I use either a walker or a wheelchair to get around.
Hmm.
I am fortunate that I'm able to drive a car, things like that. But probably my biggest issue that I come across is people who use accessible parking who don't need it.
Mm,
And people who maybe would say, oh hey, like I'm just going to be here for a minute because I'm dropping somebody off and then I'm going to move.
mm, hmm.
And I think that happens so much, and I think it
Mm,
shows that people don't really take disability seriously,
mm.
um, or as seriously as they should, because their response is, oh, it's not a big deal, I'm about to move. But
Ah,
it's
okay.
like, okay, but the there are people that can't access something because you're
Mm,
taking something from somebody who needs it. Um,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
that's I. That's one of my soapboxes for sure.
Yeah, no, I get that, because there you are, you've just shown up and you don't know if they're going to be there for 10 minutes or
Hmm.
10 hours. So you can't
Yep.
just wait on the
Yep.
off chance there might be people behind you or whatever. So you go on, and that must be infuriating.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
I know in the UK, because I'm in the UK and you're in the US, I
Hmm.
think it's a bit stricter here. I'd like to say that I don't often see people using those spaces now, because they usually will get a ticket.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know whether it's something that the
It.
society should be doing more of
Mhm.
in the US to stop that.
I would definitely say so because
Yeah.
it's a very, very common problem in the
Mm,
US, and
mm,
it happens a lot. I see it
mhm.
basically anytime I leave my house to go somewhere. I see an
Yeah,
instance where somebody who shouldn't be parked in an
yeah,
accessible spot is parked
uh-huh.
there and preventing other people from
Mm.
accessing the world.
Yeah, and that's a lot if you're seeing it every time you go out. I mean, that's crazy, isn't that? That's a lot. And are there any other things that are you're prevented from using, that other people are
Um,
taking advantage of?
So, related to the Substack post that I wrote, related to mental health care, and
Mhm,
which you touched briefly on. um, I think in my area specifically, a lot of the buildings that are used for, whoop, sorry, that
alright.
are used for mental health professionals and things like that
Mhm,
are not accessible.
mhm,
A lot of the buildings where I live, are
mhm,
old and historical and
mhm,
things like that, and they were built, before the ADA, because the
mm,
ADA actually didn't become law until 1990, which
mhm,
seems crazy to me because that it doesn't feel like
yeah,
that's been very long.
mhm,
But because those buildings were they're already in existence, they kind of got grandfathered in, if that makes sense,
mm,
and sort of
mhm,
quote unquote get a pass for not being accessible because, oh,
mhm,
making them accessible would cost a lot of money or would be a, which is usually the reason.
mm,
But
mhm,
I think, and I understand that to a degree, but I think
mhm,
when places aren't accessible, you're leaving out an entire group of people.
absolutely, and
And
that's
I
mhm,
think people they don't think about that. In the instance where, I was at my evaluation and somebody parked behind me,
mhm,
I talked to the person afterwards and I said, look, like I really needed this space because I needed to access the ramp that I was, parked directly next to. And
mhm,
the response I got was, "Oh, well, this parking is just for clinicians," even
right,
though there was a accessible parking sign right in front of my car that I was looking at, and then
mm,
I also obviously have an accessible license plate, and so
mhm,
when the person parked behind me, I mean, it was right in their face.
right,
Like they didn't have to walk around the car to see if I had any kind of placard, anything like that. It
mm,
was
you knew,
in plain view and still not
mhm,
considered. So
mhm. So what is happening to improve the situation for people who, are struggling with, moving around and needing these spaces? Is there any kind of movement going on in America, or what are you behind? Are there things that you're doing that can potentially actively change things, or raise awareness more?
I think this happened a lot during COVID, but
Mm,
during COVID, telehealth became the norm
yeah.
for people, and I
Mhm,
think telehealth has probably helped a lot of people with disabilities more than anything.
yeah.
Telehealth and, for me, remote work specifically.
Mm,
I don't know if I'd be able to do what I do if I didn't work remotely, just because it allows
Mm,
me the freedom to, you know, I can rest when I need to rest, or I can sit on the couch and work on some things as
mm,
opposed to like sitting at my desk. Like I can move around and I can put my body in positions that, are best for me.
absolutely. And is it, would you prefer to be going into an office, would you say?
Mm.
Or
Um,
if they had all the facilities,
it
that
so,
is.
so it's tricky, right? Because
Mm,
physically, absolutely not. Just because it's easier to be in my own space, and I didn't
mm,
realize how much energy I was using just not working from home. Like until
mm,
I started working remotely, I didn't realize how much energy was being expended just for me to get into the office,
yeah.
to not even start my day. And so,
Mm,
I think there's that, but I also obviously do miss the social piece of,
mm,
interacting with coworkers and things like that. I'm able to
mm.
do that remotely as well, but it's a different kind of energy than when you're with people in person.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think a lot of people realized during COVID how difficult it was being isolated and removed from other people. But that's what you're going through potentially on a much more regular basis without COVID.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit more about how you get around that. What is it that you do to make sure that you have social connection?
So I do like logistically, I get around by either using a walker or a wheelchair.
Mhm,
But I also have developed um, some social aspects of my life that help me get that social connection, even though I'm not seeing people in an office. And
mhm,
so I get that a lot from Substack, actually. The
right.
community that I've found here has been incredible. I
That's
also
nice.
have a book club that I go to every other week, which has become just a really important
Mhm,
but necessary part of my life in terms of socialization. And I've always loved to
mm,
read. I've always loved to read, so it's
mm,
just really nice to get out and see those people. And then in the beginning of the year, when I was, first starting to focus more on posts on Substack, I also started a writing group as well, where I meet
okay.
with people who are other writers, but we don't really share our writing or critique anything. It's just more like, hey, we have a dedicated hour to sit down
Mm.
together and work on whatever we're particularly working on at the time.
Ah, and
So
do you actually work or do you chat?
I so it's usually it no we actually work. So
Okay.
I bring my headphones, I set a
Mhm.
timer for an hour.
Mm.
It's usually when I get a lot of my Substack posts written, or at least started or outlined, or whatever it looks
Yeah,
like. So
that sounds really, really good. And do you afterwards treat yourself with some socialization and maybe a chat and a coffee or
hmm
yeah, is that what
hmm
happens? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So we have a dedicated writing hour from
Mhm,
6:30 to 7:30, but
mhm,
technically I have the event start at 6 and end at 8 p.m. And so,
mm,
there's 30 minutes on either side to, visit with
mm.
people and socialize and see what people are working on, if they want to share, or just
Wonderful.
whatever is going on in their life. Yeah.
Fantastic. And how do you get people to know about this? Where can people find out more about this writing club and how did you
So
originally get
so
into it?
I'm part of an organization called Shut Up and Write.
Oh, are you? That sounds good.
I think
Yeah.
it's international, but I know it's across the
Mhm,
US, but they have
mhm.
chapters everywhere. And so what you can
Right.
do is you can go on their website and search
Mhm.
your city that you live in, things like that, and different options will come up based on where you're located. So.
Oh, okay. So it's part of that group that you set up
Mhm.
like a your
Mhm.
own study
Yes.
club. That
Yeah,
sounds
because
fantastic. Yeah.
there wasn't one that was close enough to me,
Mm,
that was easy to get to. You know, the closest one to me when I initially looked was an hour away. And,
right.
just from, with
Mm,
physical and emotional energy and things like that, I knew
mm,
I wanted
mhm.
something that was closer to home. So I wasn't
Yeah.
spending quite so much time in the car.
That's fantastic. So I think that's a good message for people listening and perhaps listening later to this, that
Hmm.
because everyone on this platform is typically writing or doing something creative, and maybe more people can set them up so that if there's
Hmm.
one that's far away, you can set one up locally and yeah, have some dedicated writing time as well as a bit of a
Hmm.
chit chat either side
Hmm.
of it.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So okay, so writing and a few clubs helps you
Hmm.
through.
For sure.
What other things do you lean on? Would you
So
say?
I also have a huge support in friends and family, who
Mhm,
are nearby, and I have a amazing therapist that I've seen for a very, very long time,
mhm.
that is and has been incredible, just in helping me through things. Um,
Fantastic.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
And in terms of therapy, is it just you bring whatever you bring for that week? Is it weekly or is it sort
Hmm.
of less frequent?
It's been weekly for a while now, just so that I
Mhm.
can, work
Yeah.
through some deeper stuff that can be harder to
Mm.
get through when you don't meet as often.
No, absolutely. And have you, with this therapist, have you gone back in time to sort of process things that maybe you struggled with back then into the future, into the present
Oh,
rather?
oh yes. So,
Yeah. Mhm.
we I've how do I say this? Um, we've dug into a lot of parts of my childhood,
Mm,
and kind of picked apart, like, how did me growing up different
mm,
shape the majority of my life, you know, and
mm,
how did it, get me where I am? How did it lead to the career I chose? Just
mm,
all sorts of things. So,
mhm. And Amelia, can you kind of look back now and where you're at now and think, I'm okay. I've managed this. I'm in an okay place, or is there a sort of sense that you're still almost fighting against it and thinking, why me?
mm, that's a that has a different answer depending on the day.
Okay,
To
got you. Yeah.
to be totally honest with you, so
Mhm,
there are plenty of times where, I can look back and I can say, okay, yes, I've been through a lot, but it got me to where I am today, and I'm really proud of
mm,
that. And,
mhm,
there are definitely times like that, but then there are days if I'm having a really, really bad pain flare up and I
mm,
can't think about anything other than the fact that I hurt,
mm.
it's harder to have that, oh, it's fine, I've got this kind of attitude.
Yeah, it's not realistic, is it, for people
Hmm.
to always be carrying that sort of positive attitude?
No,
Because
no.
yeah, and tell us a bit more about the pain, because that sounds really tough. If because
Hmm.
pain, you can't get away from it. Maybe the medications you take painkillers,
Hmm.
but maybe they're not enough. How do you cope with that? How do you
So I've
push through?
had chronic pain since I was 15.
Yeah.
And I probably recently, just over the last couple of years or so, started actually taking a medicine for it. But that kind of goes back and forth as to whether it works or not.
Mm,
The primary thing for me is I do get massage pretty regularly,
mhm,
and that helps a good bit. But it's one of those things where it helps, but it only really helps in the moment and maybe a little bit afterwards. But
yeah.
it's still it's still relief, even if it's a
Mm,
very small amount of it. Um,
mm,
I've reached a point where I'm just like, look, if this can even lessen my pain for, you know, 2, 3 hours, then
Mm. Mhm.
that's 2 or 3 hours that I'm not in excruciating pain.
Absolutely. And when you go through those patches of excruciating pain, how many hours would it last, or what's the sort of range that it might go on for?
Um, so usually a couple days.
Oh,
Um,
that's a
yeah,
long time. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So my chronic pain gets worse when I do more things. If I'm walking around a lot, if I'm doing a lot of standing, if I'm, trying to chase after my 4-year-old, like at the end of all that, I'm gonna be in a lot more pain than if I just decided, oh hey, I'm gonna, sit on the couch and just chill today,
Mm, mhm,
but as everybody knows, we have lives and we have things to
mhm,
do and
mm,
what ways to get through the world, and you can't always just sit back and say, okay, well, I'm hurting and this isn't, I mean, sure, like there are days where I'm just like, okay, I'm in so much pain and this is not happening today, but
mm,
you can only say that for so many days before it's like, okay, that this
mm,
actually needs to get done.
mm. But that sounds such a struggle, because on the one
Mhm.
hand you're in pain, and the other thing you've got other side, you've got these things you want to do, and presumably there are things that you enjoy doing that you've got to make the decision, I'm not
Mhm.
doing that today, or if I do that tomorrow, I'm going to suffer.
Yep, yep. And I think I noticed that a lot with my son. So I have a 4-year-old son, and he's not
Mm,
with me 24/7. But on the time
mm,
that I do have him, he he's 4 and he has a lot of energy and he loves to,
mm,
he's a typical toddler. He loves to be outside and play and run around and all sorts of stuff, but I usually adore that time with him, but what it means
mm,
is after a weekend with my son, I usually need a day or two of a recovery period to kind of get
yeah.
back to baseline, just
Mhm,
because of how much
mhm,
I do push myself. I probably more than I should, but when it's related to my
mm,
son, I'm just like, well, like that this is what it
mhm,
is. I want to get the time with him that I
mm.
can in as
Yeah,
much of a way as I can.
yeah, and that's a big priority, isn't it? Spending
Hmm.
time with your son. And
Hmm.
and when you sort of section that time to be with him, do you think, right, tomorrow I'll have the massage, or do you factor the sort of recovery in when knowing that that's going to be happening?
Not as much as I should.
Okay.
I should probably be better about that, or planning kind of rest days around. Okay, what can I do,
Mm,
to make this the most beneficial rest
mhm,
that I can. So I
mhm.
I don't I don't do that as much as I should. So.
No, no, okay. Talking about something, it reminded me that you said to me offline that a lot of your pain is is sort of not as you can tolerate it a lot better. You know, what was it we were talking about? Childbirth, I think. It
Hmm.
wasn't a pain
Yeah.
for you, that was
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And that was quite shocking to me. You said that
Yeah.
the pain of childbirth was sort of insignificant because your
Hmm.
tolerance is so high now.
Yep. Yeah. So I remember when I was about to have my son, and I
Mm,
was having contractions, and I was at the hospital, and they were asking me occasionally, like, how are you doing? Like, are you all right? And there were many times where they looked at me and they would just be like, did you feel that? And I would be like, feel what? And they were like, you've had like many contractions in the last few minutes, and I'm just like, I can't feel anything.
mm,
And it's not that I couldn't feel it. It's like you
mhm,
said, my pain tolerance is so high that
mm,
it
mhm,
didn't even register in my brain.
mm,
Whereas most people, the the pain of childbirth is, very, very extreme and intense
mm,
and, you know, painful
mm,
and stuff like that. But I think realizing, oh wow, like I went through that, but it was a piece of cake for me
Yeah.
based on the fact that my pain tolerance is so high.
Mm, yeah. And I still find that difficult to process that fact, because if you can sort of glide through childbirth, what are you dealing with when you go through your chronic pain? It must be quite extreme.
Hmm. Yes.
And we kind of, for people that don't go through that, it's very hard to understand it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. I think, when I talk about being in pain, you know, people will often ask me, they'll throw out things like, "Oh, have you tried XYZ for your pain? Have you tried acupuncture? Have you tried extra strength Tylenol?" Just, and
mm,
I think in situations like that, I do understand that people are just trying to be nice and be supportive and things like that, but I think it feels dismissive.
mm, mhm,
Because it's kind of like, oh, like, yes, I'm aware of all these things that could potentially help me,
mm.
but wouldn't you, like, I've tried them all.
Of course you
you,
have. Of course you have.
like I
Yeah. You're living with it. You would bound to have tried everything and more.
Mhm.
But like you
Yeah.
say, I think it's people's natural tendency to try and offer something
Hmm.
because they're uncomfortable with the thought that you're in that so much pain.
Hmm.
But Amelia,
Yeah.
tell me, what would help you most from other people?
I think understanding that disability is a natural part of the human experience.
Mhm.
I think, people think disability and they worry about saying the wrong thing,
Mm,
or they don't say anything because they don't want to hurt people's feelings.
mm,
And I've often found that not saying anything is just as bad, if not
mm.
worse, than saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, it we have to talk about disability because
Mm,
it's something it's people with disabilities are the largest minority in the world,
mm,
and
mhm.
they're part of a minority that anybody can become a part of, no matter how old they
Yeah.
are, no matter their
Mhm.
economic status, finance,
Mm,
ethnicity,
mhm.
gender, age, anything.
Yeah.
And
Mm,
so I think that's probably my big message to the world
mm,
is, so many people, they think about disability or accessibility and they say, "Oh, well, that doesn't affect me." And I
mm.
think what I'd like to tell those people is that doesn't affect you now,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it could affect you later.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so if we're not thinking about it from the start,
Mm.
then we're doing a disservice to people.
Absolutely. And it's not, and I get, say at the moment where there are wars going on in the other side of the world, and we feel that
Hmm.
helpless feeling there's nothing we can do, and you kind of resign to doing maybe something at a local level, or offer goods, or just do something like that. But disability is all around us, and
Hmm.
we owe it as human beings to be educated about it, and not to
Hmm.
avoid, and to help.
For
Um,
sure.
so one of the questions I would ask you is, I mean, and you mentioned people avoid you. I
Hmm.
totally get that happens because they don't know what to
Hmm.
say or do. So tell us a bit about what people could say and how they could help and what they should offer.
So take this with a grain of salt because
Mhm,
this is my personal experience and also my personal preference. So I don't speak for every disabled person,
mhm,
but I like to talk about my experience, and so
mm,
I like for people to ask questions.
mm,
Obviously, I prefer people be genuine when they're doing
mm,
that, as opposed to trying to ask it in what could be seen as a hurtful way and things like that. But I
Mm,
also, you know, I was part of when I was in graduate school, I was part of
mm,
a student disability advisory board.
right.
And what we did is we went around to different classes across the university and we talked about disability.
Hmm.
And one thing that we said in those conversations is we would sit down with people and we would say, okay, anything that you've ever been nervous to ask someone with a disability related to living with a disability,
Hmm.
this is a safe space and this is the space for you to ask that question.
Okay.
And no, nobody's gonna have their feelings hurt. We just all want to have a conversation. And I think giving people that permission
Mm,
allowed them to realize, okay, this doesn't have to be a taboo topic. This can
mm,
be something that can be talked about, and it
mm.
needs to be something that is talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of things came up?
Um, So we talked a lot. We talked a lot about physical access quite a bit,
Hmm.
and just what it's like being a student with a disability. And so we touched a lot on the accommodations process and
Right.
just what are different supports that different people need depending on their specific disability, and then obviously informing people, just because people have the same disability doesn't mean they need support in the same way.
Hmm.
People can have the exact same disability and need completely different accommodation needs.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important for people to know.
Mm, absolutely. And also, were there questions that came up that people might be able to ask people with disabilities that they're avoiding but want to know the answer? I mean, you talk about accommodation and access and things like that, but were there any
Hmm.
sort of more specific questions like how did this happen to you, or were you born with
Hmm.
this, or are
Hmm.
they all questions that are perfectly okay to ask?
Um, it's tricky, right? Because it
Mm,
it depends on who you ask. I
right.
think the way I see it is I'm like, okay, if you ask a person with a disability a question and they don't want to answer it, they're going to tell you. And
Okay.
what's important is respecting their decision. And if they
Hmm.
say, hey, like this is something I don't really want to talk about, like okay, cool,
Mm,
like let's move on. But like
mm,
if a if an 8 or 9 year old kid comes up to me and says, "Hey, like why do you move like that?" Like I
mm,
if if they're open to me answering, then I answer as best I can. And I think,
mm,
having a young child myself also just has helped me see, the curiosity in kids and sort of,
mm.
what they're looking for. I think so much of the time, kids see people that are different from them and they're just like,
Yeah.
okay, why is that person different? I want to better
Mm,
understand. They may not be able to
mm,
frame it like that, but that's ultimately what they're looking for, is they're
yeah.
looking to understand somebody else's experience.
Mm. So really, we should go back to that sort of free way of being, and just be curious and ask, and then be guided by the person as to whether that's okay or not to ask
Hmm.
those sorts of questions.
Hmm.
And like you said, you enjoy telling people your story and your
Hmm.
experience, and that for you is quite a helpful process. It makes you
Hmm.
feel that you're being people care, they want to know,
For
I
sure.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There was another diagnosis we've talked about, or you mentioned, was ADHD.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, you had that as a child growing up, but with women, it's a bit more undiagnosed until you get a bit
Hmm.
older, which is what's
Hmm.
happened to you.
Yeah. Yes.
Um,
So I didn't get diagnosed until a few weeks ago. So I was 33 before I got my ADHD diagnosis. But when you look at the report, the evaluation that I had, things like that, it's
mm,
clear that it's something I've struggled with for my whole life, but because I present as someone who's very smart, but also has a lot of anxiety and has a tendency to be a bit of a perfectionist and,
mm,
has a lot of self-criticism, things like that.
mhm,
It's not surprising to me that it was missed. I think also, when I was in school, there was structure with that.
mhm,
And I
mm.
think losing that structure sort of sent my head into a bit of a tailspin.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know,
Mm, mm,
and that I didn't realize that structure was such an anchor for me.
mm, mhm.
Working through things when they got overwhelming. So
Yeah. And do you find now that with the diagnosis, it's been helpful to you or not?
I think it makes me better. It helps me better understand myself.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think better understanding myself allows me to better understand other people in the world.
Mm,
And
mhm.
that's never a bad thing
No,
to
that's
to
that's a
to to,
yeah,
to better understand people. And
yeah.
yeah.
And that's a very generous way of putting it because, given what we were just talking about, that a lot of people don't understand disability.
Hmm.
What you're saying is that actually having another diagnosis has helped you understand a lot of people with that, with
Hmm.
ADHD.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most people think about ADHD of being an attention deficit
Hmm.
issue,
Hmm.
which of course it is amongst other things.
Hmm.
How do you cope with that? What are your strategies?
Mm, to be honest with you, I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's such a new diagnosis
Mm,
that I'm still
mhm,
kind of, working through, what
mhm,
strategies work for me and, how
mm,
can I best support myself. That's
mhm.
a day-to-day thing that has been happening for me the last few weeks. So,
Yeah, absolutely. There are some really good, people on Substack, aren't there, with
hmm
groups about ADHD.
amazing people. Yep.
Yeah, so that's always a good source. I guess
Hmm.
we don't think of that when we first joined Substack, we're not aware that we're gonna meet all these different people that we can share stories with and get
Hmm.
help from, but it's really a
Hmm.
great side effect, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. So we've talked about quite a lot, different
Hmm.
diagnoses and different issues. We've talked about writing being helpful, community, and connection with people. I'm just trying to think what
Hmm.
else that we put into the mix of things that have helped you. So massages is for pain relief.
Hmm.
Um, People maybe opening up more to you and talking and accepting and asking for your story would be helpful too.
Hmm.
Um, Anything else that we haven't touched on? Things like specific diets or anything at all that we haven't that you
Um,
lean on that hasn't been covered yet?
not that I can think of.
No.
I think we've pretty much covered it. I think,
Mhm.
um, in general, I think, I made this as a post on Substack, I think either this morning or yesterday.
Mm,
But one of the things I like to remind people is that disability is not a bad word,
mhm,
and asking about someone's disability doesn't have to be taboo.
no,
Like I said previously, obviously, if you ask a question and somebody doesn't want to answer you, like that's you need to respect that and
mm,
understand that that's their boundary and things like that. But from what I've found, most people enjoy talking about their experience,
mm,
and
mhm,
they might just need an invitation that it's okay to do so.
mm. That's great.
Hmm.
And on that note, I'm gonna invite people to ask any questions they want to
Sure.
before we finish.
Yeah.
But please,
Yeah.
if anyone's got any questions for me, please put it in the comment. We can pick that up.
Yeah.
Um, Amazing, and you know, what you've told us, you've given us a lot of insight, and the conclusion that I've sort of made from getting to know you a bit more is that, you know, it is tough. You can't deny that living with these different things is difficult, day to day. But on the other side of that, you're an intelligent young lady. You've got your master's in social care. You advocate for people with disabilities. There's a lot of purpose. What I'm hearing, a lot of purpose coming from you, um,
Yes.
and advocacy, which is amazing. So, you know, that in itself is an inspiration. You're not, whilst you're having to deal with it, you are actually pushing yourself to make a
Mm.
difference, to
Yep.
yourself and to others,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
incredible. So thank you for sharing that. I
Oh,
think, you know,
thanks.
a lot of people will take a lot of inspiration and hope from what you've said.
Hmm. For sure.
Um, is,
Yeah.
is there any final messages you might want to give out, or places that people can go to find out more about the issues we've discussed?
Yeah, so I do obviously, just to remind people, I do write about living with a disability on my Substack. So if
Mhm.
you're, interested in that, please join the party. The more the merrier at this point. But I also, I did touch a little bit earlier on in the call related to I do have a writing group
Mm,
that I host, and that is through an organization called Shut Up and Write, and they
mm,
have chapters across the United States. It may even be international, but I can't
mm,
100% remember. But it's
mhm,
basically just a way to have a dedicated 1 hour of writing to
mm,
yourself, and it's been a really
mm.
good accountability thing for me in terms of getting posts written and making myself write and things like that.
That's fantastic, and I'd never heard of it, so I appreciate you telling me that. But I'm
Hmm.
just not sure whether the UK has that. But if it doesn't, I think it should. So maybe I'll try and
Hmm.
start something up. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
But
Okay.
I also just I wanted to say thank you to you, Harriet,
Mhm.
for this
Thank you.
opportunity because I've
Mhm,
really appreciated having the chance
mhm,
to tell my story and
mhm.
hopefully connect with some more people and hopefully get my
Yeah.
story out to a bigger audience and you
Fantastic.
know, yep.
Yeah, you're doing amazing work, and I will encourage everyone to subscribe to your Substack, and
Thank you.
I wish you all the best with what you're doing and your advocacy,
Thank you.
and to
Thank you.
take care. Yeah. So yeah, thanks again, and you know, I'm fairly sure this will be really helpful to people and give them a lot of inspiration and hope. So thanks everyone for joining, who has
Yeah.
joined,
Thank
and
you so
and
much.
I hope it's, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people watch later on when
For
they're,
sure.
well, yeah, so it's a long weekend here in the UK. Not sure whether it is for you. It's a bank holiday
No,
where people are not working, but it's not for
no,
you.
it's
Okay.
it's not here.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, take care, and thanks so much for joining
Thank you
everyone,
so
and thank you,
much.
Amelia.
Bye,
Okay.
everybody.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye.